Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
And now,
you're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. I think it's been maybe 2 or 3 years since we last had our guests on the airways. Mark Gerson is an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, co-founder of Gerson Lehman Group. He's an African Mission Healthcare involved with them, and he's a co-chair of United Hatzalah for Israel. We last had him on in his capacity of United Hatzalah of Israel. His interests are varied from Frank Sinatra to the prophet Jonah. You can find him in commentary, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today. But the reason why we invited him today is because he's written a fascinating book called The Telling, How Judaism, Essential Book, Reveals the Meaning of Life, and he's referring to the Haggadah, the Passover Haggadah. So, Mark, good to have you back again.
Zev, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So my first question is, since you write a book about Passover and the Haggadah, so Manishtana, what makes your book different than all the other Passover books, the Haggadahs that are out there?
What a great first question. I think the difference is how I read or how I interpret the Haggadah. Now, the most important question to ask when reading any book or any kind of media is, what is the genre? So I look at the Haggadah not as a dinner program, not as an instruction manual, not as a law book or a cookbook, but as a great guidebook, the Jewish guidebook for life, where all of Judaism's great questions are asked and answered in this short book. Effectively, what I think the Haggadah is the greatest hits of Jewish thought distilled into one short book that we can use at our authentic New Year celebration, which is the Passover Seder, to live happier, better, and more fulfilling lives in the year to come.
I see you subscribe to the Talmudic, or at least one of the Talmudic sages that says that the New Year starts in Nisan, the month of the Exodus of Egypt. There's obviously two opinions. One is that it starts in Tishrei when we celebrate the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. There's one that is Passover. I see you subscribe to the second one, to the Passover one.
Well, that's what's in the Bible. I mean, the Passover refers to what's now called Nisan as the head of months, basically refers to Pesach as the holiday at the head of months. The head of months is the biblical way of saying what we would call our New Year. So Pesach is really two things. It is both our New Year, and it is also another thing that every culture shares. It is our spring festival. So in America, we have a spring festival. I wrote in the book, it was the Easter egg hunt on the White House lawn. I was wrong. In the next edition, I'm going to put what it really is. The American Spring Festival is opening day. So how do we feel on opening day? How do we feel on Pesach? Well, we quite literally go outside. We feel refreshed. We feel rejuvenated. We feel the sense of newness in the air. In Israel, 500 million birds cross the country telling us this is a new year. It's a time of opportunity. It's a time to consider, how am I doing? Who am I spiritually? And how are we doing? How can we do better, both communally and nationally?
I know as you put the Jew into rejuvenating. That's what you're looking to do.
That's great. That's right. That's right.
Now, it's a fascinating book. But you're a businessman. You're a philanthropist. You're involved in different charities, including, I mentioned, United Hatzalah of Israel. So what made you decide that you're going to set time? Now, this took you a period of time to write. You didn't do it overnight. It took a lot of work, a lot of research to put it together. It's a fascinating book. What made you decide that you want to write this book? What motivated you?
What motivated me was that about 15 years ago, over a cigar with my friend Jeff Balaban.
Oh, he's a good friend of the program, too.
Yeah, he's a great guy and a great friend and a great Torah teacher. Jeff's a great Torah teacher. So we're having a cigar, and he took out the Haggadah, and he said, let's study the Haggadah, teaching me just then that the Haggadah was something worthy of study. And so we just had a great cigar together studying the Haggadah. And then I kept going, realizing what the Haggadah really is that in every passage, particularly the passages with which we're most familiar, is an absolute treasure revealing the most profound and immediately actionable Jewish wisdom. And then what I started doing is we started hosting Pesach study sessions before the holiday every year, where we'd invite lots of our friends and people in the community and people we work with. And every year it got bigger and bigger as people referred their friends, and we started doing multiple nights. And then it occurred to me that when the Haggadah is introduced as it really is, which is the great guidebook for life, a totally practical guidebook, lots of people want to learn what Jewish wisdom has to say to guide them in their daily decisions. So I said, I'll write a book that asks and answers the great questions from the Haggadah.
So what would you say, of the Haggadah asks 4 questions, what to you is the most important question that you gleaned from the Haggadah?
Well, there are so many great questions. I think the Haggadah basically asks and answers all of the great questions of life and just guides us Jewishly in the most profound and actionable ways. But let's talk about the 4 questions. So the 4 questions, I believe, instructs us as to how to become a Jewish educator, which, of course, all we Jewish parents are. So the 4 questions, as everyone knows, are about matzah, maror, dipping, and reclining. Now, the purpose of the 4 questions is to arouse the interest of the children. That being said, who among us has ever been to a Seder where a child has leapt from her chair and says, "Oh my God, we're dipping twice. Tell me about the Exodus"? I posit that nobody has ever done that, and that consequently we can acknowledge that the 4 questions, in fact, don't serve their purpose in interesting the children, and thus they're mediocre. So why in the past several thousand years has nobody thought of 4 better questions? Because there aren't 4 better questions, because Judaism believes that education must be done with regards to the sacred specificity and uniqueness of each child. As King Solomon said, educate a child according to his way. So when we sit down at the Seder or any other kind of educational experience, we should think, what is the unique access point for the particular child or children before me now? That's why the chapter of my book on that subject is called Why Whoopee Cushions Are Kosher for Passover. Because if a child is mischievous, put a whoopee cushion under her chair. If a child loves baseball, then give them a pack of baseball cards if he asks a good question. If a child loves dessert, then give him dessert before the meal. But just think about what is sacred and unique and special about this child at this point in his or her life, and let's educate accordingly.
Now, it's interesting. You picked the one question about dipping. And if you analyze the Haggadah answers the other 3 questions about why we eat matzah on the Passover now, why we eat maror, bitter herbs, why we recline, but doesn't really answer the question why we dip twice. And from what I understand, the 2 dippings that it's referring to is the first dipping of the brothers dipped Joseph's coat in blood. That's one dipping that it's referring to. And the other dipping is the Passover dipping, where you dipped and you put the blood on the helms of every Israelite, every Jewish person in Egypt, when God passed over on the night of Passover. So what's the connection? The first dipping is dipping of hatred, because one Jew hated one another. The second one is of unity, where everybody's unified together. The Paschal Lamb had to be a unity for each one of the family, different kind of experience. But the Haggadah doesn't get into specifics about that, but that's really the key, is bringing the family together, bringing unity, because the first dipping was a disunity, and this is the fact we all get together.
What a beautiful interpretation. And I think you actually resolved a second question from the Haggadah with that interpretation, which is, why isn't Moses in the Haggadah? Additionally, why isn't Joseph in the Haggadah? And why aren't the heroic women of the Exodus, Shiphrah, Puah, the midwives, Miriam, and the Pharaoh's daughter in the Haggadah? And I think you just articulated so perfectly, which is the Haggadah is just a guidebook. It's the greatest guidebook ever written, but all it is a guidebook. It's up to us, each of us Jewish parent educators, to tell the story to our children. So Joseph, Moses, and the women of the Exodus have to be in our Passover Seder. They're just not in the Haggadah. So we have to bring out the story of the Exodus ourselves to our children and talk about Joseph and talk about Moses and talk about the women in the roles they served, exactly as you did. And what a perfect way to do it with regards to the third question.
And I think also in terms of the Haggadah, the main stress is what God did for the Jewish people. So even though Moshe was his agent, and so was Miriam and the righteous women, but the stress on Passover night is what God took us out from Egypt. And we have to look at ourselves as if we're coming out of Egypt today. So it's a different mindset that we don't include anybody else. We're not worshiping anybody else except for God on the night of Passover.
That's right. But we also talk about Jacob and we talk about Abraham, and we're not concerned about worshiping them. I think so. I think the purpose, because all these omissions, we omit Joseph too. And as you just said, it's impossible to tell the story of the Exodus without reference to Joseph. And yet we're charged with telling the story of the Exodus, telling us parents, yes, you have to tell the story of the Exodus, but you have to do it. When it comes to educating your children, that's something that can't be outsourced.
No, certainly, and teaching children, that's what it's all about. And as you point out, the 4 sons that the Torah talks about, who do you give them a role in today's day and age? Who the 4 sons are? The wicked one, the one that can't ask, the simpleton, the evil one. Do you assign characters in today's day and age in the book?
Well, I think each of the 4 sons, like everything else in the Haggadah, has intensely practical and actionable significance. For instance, and significance in the way that it can really guide us to live happier and better and more meaningful and more fulfilling lives today. So, for instance, let's take the son who is unable to ask. Okay, I do not think this is a 3 or a 4-year-old, because how do we educate a 3 or 4-year-old? We have them smell the smells, taste the food. Most importantly, just feel the love, observe the relationships, and know that there's something special about tonight. So who's the son who's unable to ask? Well, when the great Rav Levi of Berdichev would come to this part in his Seder, he would get very pensive and very prayerful and very serious until someone said to him, Rabbi, what's going on? This section is about the children. He said, no, it's not. He said, it's about me. He said, I'm the son who's unable to ask the question. He said, I am now praying to God to give me the strength and the wisdom to ask the questions I should be asking. So I think when we think about the 4th son, we should realize that each of us, we are all the son who is unable to ask the question. And when we think about the mistakes that we've made in our lives, we can ask, were they from not asking the right questions or not giving the right answers? And it's almost always going to be from not asking the right questions. When we can ask the right questions, the answers are usually easy. It's the questions that are hard to come up with. And I think when we read this magnificent passage from the 4th son, we're acknowledging that each of us is the 4th son, and we're realizing how difficult it is and how important it is to ask the right questions. And by asking God to help us do so, and by reminding ourselves of its difficulty, I think we're going to ask some questions that we otherwise wouldn't have, and it'll help us live a better life in the year to come.
I like that. We have to always ask questions. And it's Lubavitcher Rebbe who said it's the 5th son that's not there, the one who doesn't even show up, and that's problematic because even the evil son is there. It's all part. Everybody's together. But the one that the most problematic is the 5th son that doesn't show up at all to the Seder, which is unfortunate in today's day and age in America and around the world.
That's right. I think that's such a profound point from the Rebbe, like all of his points were. And absolutely. So when there's the wicked son, there's one thing that can be said to recommend the wicked son, which is that he's there. And I think it's important to acknowledge the wicked son is probably a late teenager, right? He's certainly not a small child, because small children aren't wicked. So he's not a small child in the fact that if it's a 3 or 4-year-old, we can tell them you have to be at the Seder and they'll be there. With a late teenager, a 16 or a 17-year-old, they can physically be where they want to be. Yet the wicked child has chosen, for whatever reason, to be at the Seder, and that choice commends him, and it enables us to give a lifeline to him. And the answer that we give to the wicked son, which I explain in the book, is so magnificent and so important. It's really the way that we can reach and redeem any wayward child in our midst. And Zev, as you said, that the truly tragic child is the 5th son. That's the son who didn't show up, because if the son's not there, then there's nobody to throw a lifeline to, then we can't redeem him. But the wicked son, the Haggadah shows us how we can approach the act of redemption.
As you were talking, I was thinking about I once spoke to a Chabad rabbi in San Francisco, and I was wondering how his outreach was going. So he said his best outreach was among the people that came and challenged him about Judaism. The ones that were apathetic, didn't show up at all. He says he can't even reach out to them. They're not interested. But if they're showing up, even if they're asking questions and tough questions, and sometimes being hostile, they're there engaging. So there you can have a conversation. You can get to them. If they don't show up, if they're apathetic, forget about it.
That's such a profound point, and it also reminds me of the 7th plague, which is the hail plague. Now, the hail plague is the plague where God says, now I will send all my plagues. Now, why is God announcing himself with the hail plague? Because he warns. And when we warn somebody, what we're saying is, I don't want to hurt you. So warning is an act of compassion. So what kind of God would warn everybody, the Jews and the Egyptians? What kind of God would warn the Egyptians? The Egyptian God. So God here is announcing that I, God, am the God of everybody. Now, it tells us in the text that there were two kinds, the Exodus text, there were two kinds of Egyptians. There were those who heeded the word of God and took cover, and there were those who did not heed the word of God. There was nobody who didn't believe in God. There were those who heeded and those who didn't, those who were caring and those who were apathetic, and just teaching us that even worse perhaps than disbelief is apathy.
Absolutely. And by the way, before we break, when you mentioned about the four sons, there's an opinion, I have to remember it and research it, where when the Torah talks about four sons, it's really one person to go through different phases of life.
Right.
Which I think is also a profound thought of that.
Absolutely.
Our guest is a philanthropist. He is an entrepreneur. He is very involved in charities, from co-founder of the Gerson Lehman Group to African Mission Healthcare and United Hatzalah of Israel, where he's a co-founder there. But his fascinating book is called The Telling, How Judaism's Essential Book Reveals the Meaning of Life. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned.
Talkline radio and TV with Zev Brenner is just phenomenal. Everybody concerned about the Jewish community should listen and watch. He has the best guests. He asks the most interesting questions. He's always so well prepared. It's talk radio and television from a Jewish point of view at its very best.
To advertise on the Talkline network and Talkline's email and social media blasts reaching over 70,000 people, please call 212-769-1925, extension 100. That's 212-769-1925, extension 100. Or email info@talklinenetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981. You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. Our guest, Mark Gerson. He's written a fascinating book. He's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist. He is co-founder of the Gerson Lehman Group, but he's also involved with the African Mission Healthcare. I believe it's a Christian charity and the United Hatzalah of Israel, but he's here because of his book. It's called The Telling, How Judaism's Essential Book Reveals the Meaning of Life. He's talking about the Haggadah, which is a fascinating book on its own. In fact, I believe, Mark, about 90% of American Jews observe Passover in some way or fashion, which is not true of any other Jewish holiday. So it is the most popular Jewish holiday, even though they may not observe it all in the same way.
By far, absolutely.
Now, in your book, you don't write about anti-Semitism. You call it Jew hatred. So I was curious about that designation, because the fact is, though, in Egypt is the first time we saw a systematic means of killing and putting Jews in concentration camp, war camps, slaughtering them. So why do you choose, talking about the Exodus, to refer to not as anti-Semitism, but as Jew hatred?
Well, anti-Semitism is a clinical term invented relatively recently that is not descriptive of what the dynamic that we're addressing is. The dynamic is Jew hatred. It's people who hate Jews. It's the philosophy of hating Jews. That's what it is, so we might as well call it what it is. And you're so right that that Jew hatred is born in the Exodus story, that literally in the same breath, when the Pharaoh invents the Jews as a people, he also invents Jew hatred in literally the same breath. So what does this teach us? It teaches us what the great historian Barbara Tuchman said, which is that anti-Semitism, or as I would say, Jew hatred, exists independently of the Jew. There's nothing the Jew does to cause the Jew hater to hate us. Nothing. Anti-Semitism or Jew hatred is independent of the Jews. So if we ask, what did we do to arouse this hatred? The answer is nothing. The proof is in the Exodus text, which says that Jew hatred or anti-Semitism began simultaneously with the existence of the Jewish people.
Now, there is one of the comments, which I don't know if you're aware, which is a brilliant thought. It talks about the fact that, the Egyptians enslaved the Jewish people and they afflicted us. And the Haggadah adds to that verse in the Torah that they said, let us be wise. The Jews are going to become a fifth column. Our enemies are going to attack us, and the Jews are going to side with our enemies, and they're going to throw us out of the land. So I thought a novel interpretation that the Pharaoh in Egypt had a problem. Listen, because you mentioned Joseph before. Joseph saved the economy of Egypt. The Bible talks about that. So how do you take Joseph's descendants and his people and put them in concentration camps and work camps? they saved your country. So the first thing you have to do is Vayareo son of Mitzvah, which we interpret they did evil to us, is that their interpretations, they invented evil about us. They say the Jews are a fifth column. Once you say the Jews, and this is what the Nazis did, once Goebbels and the Nazi propaganda machine invented things about the Jews being a fifth column and undermining the German economy and doing terrible things, then you can enslave them. You can put them in concentration camps. You can kill them. So this is something which started in Egypt, but unfortunately we see it in our own day and time, with the Nazis being one analogy to that.
Exactly. What a brilliant analysis. And also we can see in the Exodus text that the Pharaoh made it harder for us to build what he wanted for us to build because he took away the straw. Leading one to ask, why did the Pharaoh take away the straw? Why did he take away the straw from us to build with? We could have presumably built more, bigger, and faster with the straw. So why did he take it away? It's teaching us about the Jew hater, which is that the Jew hater, and we see this in the plagues too. So in plagues 1, 2, and 3, well, plagues 1 and 2, blood and frogs, so there's so much blood it goes into every crevice. There's so many frogs that they enter people. So the Pharaoh's magicians, what do? They don't get rid of the blood in the frogs. They create more blood in frogs. The Pharaoh doesn't give us more straw to build more stuff with. He takes it away to make it harder. What do these things have in common? That the Jew hater or the anti-Semite is very willing to accept some pain in order to bring about what the Jew hater regards as the greater pleasure, which is harming the Jew. Therefore, the Pharaoh is willing to have more blood and more frogs afflict Egypt if it means, which it did, that the Jews would suffer some pain. So people today who say this Jew hating regime or that Jew hater is rational, they won't do this. That's not how the Jew hater thinks. The Jew hater thinks, I will accept plenty of pain if it can bring the greater pleasure of inflicting pain on the Jews. Therefore, the question is, people say, for instance, that the Iranian regime is rational and therefore it would not go nuclear, God forbid, against Tel Aviv. That's not how the Jew hater thinks. The Jew hater is willing to take pain in order to inflict more pain on the Jew, as the Pharaoh taught us in the Exodus story.
A wonderful analogy, because I didn't think of it that way, but the truth is he was willing to accept pain on him and his people if he can hurt Jews, and which is what
Right.
the Iranians and Hamas and Hezbollah and all these terrorist groups are willing to engage in pain as long as they can kill Jews.
Right.
Mark Gerson is our guest. Now, I know you've written articles on different things from Frank Sinatra to the biblical prophet Jonah. Does Frank Sinatra show up at all in your book, The Telling?
I don't think Frank Sinatra does, but Elvis does. And in the acknowledgments, when I say next year in Graceland, and again, when I talk about Cecil B. DeMille, who made really two of the greatest movies in American history, and by any standard, including commercial success in current dollars, the 1923 and 1956 Exodus. And I make the point that Cecil B. DeMille was as Jewish, Zev, as you and I are, and as Elvis, in that you, me, Cecil B. DeMille, and Elvis all had Jewish mothers.
All right, Elvis was Jewish. In fact, I understand he was. Didn't he have training as in cantorial Jewish music? Isn't there a connection with that with Elvis Presley?
I believe when he was growing up in Tupelo, before he moved to Memphis, his neighbor was a cantor, and he was inspired by hearing that kind of music. I believe that's what happened.
Exactly. I believe that had an influence on him. So, okay, you connect all the Jewish dots. This book is not only written for Jews, it's also written for non-Jews. How they've received the book?
Well, I mean, what a great question. I mean, I've been really so privileged to be able to speak in the last several weeks with 3 or 4 groups a day, and about half of them, or a little more than half, are Gentile groups, church groups. And what I've been seeing firsthand, and what I've been so blessed to be able to experience, is just seeing how so many evangelical Christians are thirsting to rediscover their Jewish roots. And they're doing it with this deep and abiding and profound love of the Jewish people, of the Jewish state, of the Jewish religion, and of our shared sacred text of the Bible. And they want to learn about the Exodus. They want to learn about the Haggadah. They want to learn about the life lessons that are so present and waiting to be shared from the Haggadah and from the Torah. And it's just been such a blessing to be able to share it with so many of our Christian friends. And I believe we're going through a world historic moment in that in thousands and thousands of years, we have never had friends like we have now among evangelical Christians. And this friendship has really been created, developed, and blossomed in the last 40 years, in the lifetime of most people listening now. And it's such a blessing, and it's a blessing available to everybody to participate in this great friendship. And I also show in the book how this friendship has some biblical provenance, in that the best friend and mentor of Abraham was the Gentile king Melchizedek. The best friend and mentor of Moses was Jethro. And then we have Caleb, who was the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, who was Joshua's great partner in the two spies who said, we can take the land. And so now here we are with these great friends among Christians, and it's just been such a blessing to be able to share and learn this great text with them.
Absolutely. Now, certainly, by the way, Melchizedek, we believe, according to tradition, was Shem from the son of Noah, who was also the high priest, and he transferred that authority to Abraham, according to rabbinic tradition. But and Yisro Jethro converted to Judaism. But anyway, it's a great thought. But here's an interesting thought, though, and I love the fact that the evangelical Christians are pro-Israel. But what's disturbing, and I know you're involved in United Hatzalah, is that the newer generation of evangelical Christians are becoming more pro-Palestinian. I spoke to evangelical leaders. It's a concern. I'm not sure what can be done about it, but it's a concern to them, and it should be a concern to us as too, that they're slowly moving away from that pro-Israel tilt that they have.
That dynamic is there, and I would say, well, I have an idea of what can be done about it, which is there's this spectacular group that I'm very close to called Eagle's Wings, and Eagle's Wings takes primarily young millennial evangelical pastors to Israel, and then continues this relationship of deep love for the Jewish people, of deep love for the Jewish state long after the trip. And many of the talks that I've given to Gentiles have been at the invitation of pastors who've been to Israel with Eagle's Wings. And when Eagle's Wings introduces young evangelical pastors to Israel on these 12-day trips, and I've been with them on a couple of the trips, we've had Shabbat dinner at United Hatzalah headquarters, you could just see the love of the Jewish people, of the Jewish state, of all things Jewish, just blossom.
It's like a Christian. It's like a Christian birthright.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, pastors from all over the country applied or are tapped to come join, and they take hundreds of people in a normal year. And I think the next trip's planned for June, and it works. It really inculcates, like a trip for Israel does to each of us. I mean, to go to Israel is to fall in love with Israel.
Absolutely.
And,
no, it's great. Hopefully that's the case, because it is concerning when I speak to pastors about the newer generation, and certainly it's something which going to Israel should be a major thing, and I'm glad to see that it's doing. But we have to keep an eye on it. It's something that's of major concern. Just as we close out, I just wanted to share a thought with you that you may find interesting. Do people ever stop and wonder why the Torah goes so crazy about chametz, unleavened bread, where you can't even have a small piece, where it's something which is supposed to be restricted for the Passover holiday? And when do we stop eating bread? About 10 o'clock in the morning. Why is that the case? Is that why we do it 10 o'clock? And why is the Torah so insistent about not even a parcel of bread?
Well, and you're absolutely right. We have to purge our homes of hametz during Pesach, and I think it's for a very important existential reason. There's nothing technical about it. It's existential, in that in the biblical imagination, it all relates to salt, and salt had an extraordinarily important and sacred function in ancient times, and it's all over the Bible. And that was, salt is the ancient preservative. If you don't have refrigeration, salt is the next best thing, and it works well. So salt in the biblical imagination is equated with preservatives. And if you put salt on yeast, the yeast does not rise. So when we cleanse our homes of hametz, when we throw out the bread and when we bring in the matzah, what we're doing is we're doing the physical act that reinforces the spiritual. It helps us begin to think, what in my life do I want to be permanent? What in my life do I want to preserve? And what in my life do I want to throw out? Do I not want to preserve? Do I not want to keep permanent?
Beautiful thought, and I'll give you an alternative one from I saw from Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Goodman. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, I believe it was 1912, the Egyptians invented bread, the art of making bread. In fact, the ingredients that were prohibited on Passover, I think 4 or 5 of them are what the Egyptians perfected. And if you look in the Bible, look in Genesis, they wouldn't eat bread with the Jews, with the Hebrews, because they almost worshiped the bread, and it was their contribution to civilization. So according to Rabbi Goodman, what we're really doing is we're saying to them, and according to one of the commentators, the Egyptian day started at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we're saying if the Egyptians contribute to society, to civilization, the art of bread making, and they can be so uncivilized by killing Jews and enslaving them, then we say 10 o'clock in Egyptian time that, you may have invented bread, you may be civil and contribute to civilization. If you can kill our people, we're going to shun your contribution to civilization. And therefore we start in Egyptian time not eating bread, and then when we eat bread again, it's on Jewish time, just to make home that point. And I thought it's an interesting thought.
Very interesting, and that's such an interesting interpretation, and it just brings to mind another one of the great gifts of the Haggadah, which is that we can interpret the same thing in multiple ways and learn different truths from the same interpretation. So in the book, I talk about different interpretations of an egg, different interpretations of Haroset. No one who really goes to one interpretation said the other interpretation was wrong, because a great Jewish symbol, we can learn multiple truths from the same symbol.
Shivim Panim Torah, 70 Facets of Torah. Mark Gerson, right. Philanthropist, we want to thank you for being with us. The book, I recommend, is called The Telling. It's How Judaism Essential Book Reveals the Meaning of Life. And what's going to be your sequel?
Well, that's a great question. So one thing I realized is I submitted the book, but I did not finish it, because right after I submitted it, I study every day on the treadmill, and every time I learn, I think, wow, this really could fit into this section of the book on the Haggadah. So the sequel is just going to be things that I've learned since the publication of the last edition, and God willing, I will keep doing that every year, because the Haggadah is the gift that keeps giving, just like the Torah is. So God willing, I'll keep having a new edition every year, maybe every 2 years, with new things I've learned, including with things I learned from you this afternoon, including things that I've learned from you this afternoon, Zev, and I'm going to keep doing this every year or two until I can't do it anymore. But it's such a blessing to be able to study the Haggadah, to be able to study the Torah, and to be able to seek and extract some of the endlessly generative life lessons that our treasures, the treasures of the Jewish people, give us to help us to live happier, better, and more meaningful lives in the most practical ways, starting tonight.
And thank you. And may I recommend that the next book be called The Retelling?
That's great. That's great. Well, as you know, what do we do? We don't tell the story. We relive and we retell the story. So, I'm going to use that. That's terrific. The retelling.
Anyway, we hope you join us again. It was a year since you last were on the Broy. I enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to keep our conversation going and continued success, and especially with the book and all your other endeavors, including as co-chair of United Hatzalah of Israel, which saves so many lives on a daily basis. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Zev. What a pleasure.
And we're going to be right back.
Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is David Gabe, and you're listening to The Zev Brenner Show.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.